You have felt the wobble, stepping sideways around a piece of furniture and feeling the standing hip scramble to find its correction. Turning to look behind you while walking and sensing the body hesitate, a fraction of a second where the balance system searched for a response it did not have ready. Reaching sideways to grab something off a shelf and noticing the standing leg work harder than reaching forward ever required. You filed each moment under clumsiness, under aging, under nothing, under. Try it now. Shift your weight onto one foot, reach the other foot 12 inches to the side and bring it back. The wobble in your standing leg, the scramble at the hip, the correction you barely made happened in a direction your balance has almost certainly never been trained. The single leg stand, the channel described as a mortality predictor, tests one direction, forward and backward. The ankle strategy. The muscles that control anteroposterior sway, gastrocnemius pulling you forward, tibialis anterior pulling you back, the foot acting as a narrow platform that the ankle muscles modulate to keep the body's center of mass over the base of support. What you just felt was lateral, a different strategy, a different muscle group, a different neural circuit operating at a different correction speed. The gluteus medius on the standing leg, the muscle the lateral stepping discussion described as the primary frontal plane stabilizer, had to fire reactively to prevent your pelvis from dropping toward the unsupported side. If you had tapped backward instead of sideways, the correction would have come from a third system entirely. The anterior chain, the quadriceps and hip flexors pulling you forward to prevent a backward fall. 3 directions, 3 different stabilization systems, 3 different cerebellar computations, each one independent, each one trainable. And in most adults over 55, only one of the 3 has ever been asked to perform. Stumbles that send a 65-year-old to the emergency room rarely arrive from the anteroposterior direction, the direction every balance test measures and every balance exercise trains. They arrive from the side, a lateral perturbation the gluteus medius must catch within 200 milliseconds, or they arrive rotationally, a twist during a turn that the deep hip rotators must stabilize before the body spirals past the recovery point. The balance the 10-second stand measures is real. The balance the fall demands is different. The directions you have trained are not the directions in which you will fall. Human movement occurs in 3 anatomical planes, and balance operates independently in each one. Winter established this independence through force plate analysis at the University of Waterloo, demonstrating that the control strategies for anteroposterior and mediolateral balance use fundamentally different muscles, different neural pathways, and different reflex timings. Training one does not transfer to the others. A person with excellent anteroposterior balance can have poor mediolateral balance, and the force plate detects the independence immediately. Sagittal plane divides the body into left and right halves. Movement in this plane is forward and backward. Walking is sagittal. Every step moves forward through the sagittal plane. Leaning to reach a shelf is sagittal. The ankle strategy, gastrocnemius and tibialis anterior modulating ankle angle, is the primary balance mechanism in this plane. This is the plane every clinical balance test measures: the single leg stand, the tandem stance, the Romberg test, all sagittal, all anteroposterior, all testing the ankle strategy while leaving the hip strategy and the rotational stabilizers unmeasured. Frontal plane divides the body into front and back halves. Movement in this plane is side to side. Stepping around furniture is frontal. Reaching sideways to grab a handrail is frontal. Getting into a car requires a lateral weight shift through the frontal plane. Balance in this plane relies on the hip strategy, the gluteus medius on the stance side contracting to prevent pelvic drop, the adductors on the swing side controlling the return. The ankle provides almost no mediolateral correction because the foot is narrow in this direction, approximately 8 to 10 centimeters of mediolateral base compared to 25 centimeters of anteroposterior base. There is simply not enough platform for ankle modulation to be effective laterally. The hip must do the work that the ankle cannot. Transverse plane divides the body into upper and lower halves. Movement in this plane is rotational. Turning to look behind you is transverse. Twisting to reach something on a side table while seated is transverse. Balance in this plane relies on the deep hip rotators, the piriformis, the obturator internus and externus, the gemelli, the quadratus femoris, and the oblique abdominal chains that resist torsional displacement around the vertical axis. These muscles are the smallest and least trained of the three stabilization groups, and they are the stabilizers most relevant to the rotational falls that occur when older adults turn while walking. A person who trains static single-leg standing is training anteroposterior balance almost exclusively. The standing position generates minimal medial lateral or rotational demand. Because the body is static, no lateral or rotational perturbation arrives. The ankle strategy muscles improve, the hip strategy muscles and rotational stabilizers receive minimal stimulus. Balance improves in one plane. Vulnerability in the other two remains. Standing on the right leg, tapping the left foot forward 12 inches and returning it, the forward reach shifts the body's center of mass anteriorly over the stance foot. The shift is deliberate. You are creating a perturbation with your own moving leg. This is fundamentally different from static standing, where the body sways passively and the corrections are small. During the tap, the perturbation is large, 12 inches of leg. Reach shifts the center of mass by approximately 5 to 8 centimeters forward of its resting position. The stance leg must resist this displacement through eccentric activation of the posterior chain. The gluteus maximus fires to extend the hip backward. The hamstrings fire to prevent the knee from flexing under the shifted load. The gastrocnemius fires to press the ankle into plantar flexion, pulling the tibia backward and shifting the body's weight toward the heel. Forward tap trains the posterior chain's reactive response to anterior displacement, the exact correction your body must produce when you lean forward unexpectedly, reaching for something on a shelf that is further away than you estimated, being nudged from behind in a cue, bending to pick something up while standing on one leg because the other foot is on a step or a curb. Each of these scenarios shifts the center of mass forward over the stance foot, and the posterior chain must fire at the correct magnitude within the 200 millisecond reactive window to prevent the forward fall. Calibration is specific. Each repetition teaches the cerebellum the relationship between the magnitude of the forward shift and the magnitude of the posterior chain response required to counteract it. Too much response pulls you backward into overcorrection. Too little lets you fall forward past the recovery point. The cerebellum computes the error between the intended correction and the actual outcome and adjusts the motor command for the next cycle. 5 forward taps per leg provides 10 calibration cycles per session, 10 opportunities for the error correction algorithm to refine the forward perturbation response. Now, the lateral tap. Tapping the left foot 12 inches to the left, the lateral reach shifts the center of mass toward the unsupported side. This is the highest demand gluteus medius activation available from a standing position, higher than lateral stepping, which allows weight transfer to the moving foot and distributes the load across both legs. During the lateral tap, the stance leg bears full body weight while the perturbation occurs. The gluteus medius on the stance side must generate peak abduction force within 200 milliseconds of the lateral weight shift. 200 milliseconds is the reactive balance window, the time between the perturbation arriving at the proprioceptors and the corrective muscle response reaching adequate force to prevent the fall. Mackey and McElroy published the critical data on this window in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society, documenting that compensatory stepping responses to unexpected perturbation must initiate within this time frame to prevent a fall in older adults. The lateral tap teaches the gluteus medius to fire at the required magnitude within the required time frame, rehearsing the exact scenario that lateral falls present. Now, lateral direction is where the data concentrates and where the consequences are most severe. Hip fractures in adults over 65 result predominantly from lateral falls. The mechanism is direct. When the body falls sideways, the greater trochanter of the femur strikes the ground. The force transmits through the femoral neck, the narrowest point of the thigh bone, the point where the shaft angles inward to meet the hip socket. The femoral neck fractures under the impact because the bone at this location is thin, the trabecular lattice is sparse from years of declining loading and hormonal support, and the force arrives laterally, a direction the femoral neck's geometry is least equipped to resist. Forward falls typically produce wrist fractures. The outstretched hand catches the body before the hip contacts the ground. The instinct to extend the arm is protective of the hip at the cost of the wrist. Backward falls produce occipital skull injuries and cervical spine trauma, dangerous but less common because backward falls are the least frequent direction of fall in community-dwelling older adults. Hip fractures carry the highest morbidity and mortality of any fall-related injury. 20% of adults over 65 who sustain a hip fracture do not survive the following year. Among survivors, 50% do not return to their pre-fracture mobility level. The hip fracture is not merely an injury, it is the entry point to a deconditioning cascade: hospitalization, bed rest, muscle atrophy, loss of confidence, reduced walking, accelerated sarcopenia, increased fall risk, that converts a single lateral fall into a permanent reduction in independence. Direction that produces this cascade is the direction the gluteus medius must catch. The lateral tap rehearses the catch, over and over 5 times per leg per session, each repetition giving the gluteus medius a measured perturbation to respond to within the reactive window. The muscle that catches the lateral fall is the muscle that must fire fastest, hardest, and most precisely, and it receives no training from standing still, from walking forward, or from any sagittal plane exercise. Only lateral perturbation trains the lateral response. Only the lateral tap provides that perturbation from a single leg stance where the demand matches the real-world scenario: full body weight on one leg, the perturbation arriving from the side, the gluteus medius generating peak abduction force within 200 milliseconds to prevent the pelvic drop that precedes the lateral fall. Well, the backward tap, tapping the left foot 12 inches behind, the posterior reach shifts the center of mass backward. The anterior chain, quadriceps, hip flexors, tibialis anterior must fire reactively to prevent the body from falling backward. The quadriceps extend the knee to stiffen the stance leg. The hip flexors pull the pelvis forward. The tibialis anterior dorsiflexes the ankle to shift weight toward the toes. Backward perturbation is the direction nobody trains because no common daily movement produces it. Walking is forward. Stair climbing is upward. Even lateral stepping, which some balance programs include, is sideways. Clinical balance protocols prescribed after falls rarely include backward perturbation. The direction is neglected because it is rare in daily life, but its rarity is precisely why the corrective response is weakest. The anterior chain has never been asked to fire reactively against backward displacement, and the cerebellar computation for backward correction has no training data set. Backward falls are the least common but the most dangerous, producing skull fractures and cervical spine injuries that forward and lateral falls do not produce. The backward tap trains the anterior stabilization response that no other movement activates, a response that lies dormant until the moment a backward perturbation arrives, and the anterior chain must fire within 200 milliseconds to prevent the fall. The afternoon I sent my foot 12 inches to the side unsupported, 1 foot 12 inches to the side. No chair, no wall, no chair, no wall, deliberately unsupported, and felt the standing hip scramble to find the correction. I understood the gap in my own balance training. Static single leg standing was a skill I had practiced. The anteroposterior correction was trained. The lateral correction was not. The gluteus medius on my standing leg fired late, fired weak, and barely caught the perturbation before my pelvis dropped past the correction point. The wobble was the untrained direction announcing itself. You know the 3 directions and the 3 stabilization systems each one demands. The question changes from which directions are untrained to why training all 3 in rapid sequence produces a cerebellar adaptation that training each separately cannot match. The cerebellum learns from perturbation through error-driven Purkinje cell computation. Each perturbation produces a sensory prediction error, the difference between where the cerebellum expected the body to be after the corrective response and where the body actually ended up. The Purkinje cells. The large output neurons of the cerebellar cortex, each one receiving input from up to 200,000 parallel fibers carrying sensory data from the proprioceptors, the vestibular organs, and the visual system. Detect this prediction error and adjust the motor command for the next cycle. More error means more learning. The synaptic weights change faster when the prediction was wrong. Less error means the correction is calibrated and the cerebellum shifts to a maintenance mode where the existing motor command is refined rather than rebuilt. 3 taps in 3 directions provide 3 distinct perturbation response datasets per cycle. Each dataset requires a different motor strategy: posterior chain for forward perturbation, gluteus medius for lateral, anterior chain for backward. 5 cycles per leg provide 30 datasets per session. Static single leg standing provides the cerebellum with 1 dataset: anteroposterior sway correction, repeated continuously for the duration of the hold. The information density is not comparable. 30 datasets across 3 motor strategies versus 1 dataset repeated for 30 seconds. Switching matters as much as the individual corrections. During the 3-tap cycle, the cerebellum must shift from posterior chain activation for the forward tap to gluteus medius activation for the lateral tap to anterior chain activation for the backward tap. 3 different motor strategies executed in 6 seconds. The switching itself is the training. Real-world perturbations do not announce their direction before they arrive. The person who stumbles does not know whether the perturbation is forward, lateral, or rotational until it has already begun. A lateral push in a crowd arrives without warning. A backward slip on a wet surface announces itself only through the sudden loss of traction under the heel. A rotational stumble during a turn reveals its direction only as the torso begins spiraling past the vertical axis. In each case, the cerebellum has approximately 200 milliseconds to identify the perturbation direction, select the correct motor strategy from its database, and execute the corrective response at the required magnitude. The cerebellar system that has rehearsed rapid switching between 3 corrective strategies responds faster and more accurately than the system that has rehearsed only 1, because the switching itself has been trained, and the identification to execution pipeline has been compressed through repetition. Mansfield and colleagues demonstrated the transfer in gait and posture in 2015. Perturbation-based balance training reduced fall rates in older adults more effectively than traditional balance exercises, including static standing and tandem stance. The difference was not marginal. The perturbation-trained group showed significantly fewer falls over the follow-up period than the traditionally trained group, despite spending equivalent total time in balance training. The mechanism is specificity, the principle that the nervous system adapts to what it rehearses, not to what it approximates. Falls are perturbation events. They arrive suddenly from unpredictable directions at unpredictable magnitudes. Training with perturbation builds the cerebellar database of corrective responses the system needs when the real perturbation arrives. Training without perturbation, standing still and trying not to sway, builds a database of stillness maintenance that the stumble does not reference. The body learns what it rehearses. It does not generalize well to what it has not rehearsed. And then, multiple independent age-related declines converge on the 200 millisecond reactive balance window after 60. Each decline is gradual. Each is individually manageable. Together they compound into a window that closes faster than any single factor would predict. Gluteus medius force output declines through sarcopenia, 1 to 2% per year of force-generating capacity lost from the muscle that catches lateral perturbations. A correction that arrives within the 200 millisecond window may not be strong enough to prevent the fall even if it arrives on time. The gluteus medius that generated 50 newtons of peak abduction force at 40 generates 35 at 60. The perturbation that required 40 newtons to catch is no longer within the muscle's capacity. The timing was adequate. The force was not. Purkinje cell density decreases at approximately 2.5% per decade after 50. These are the large output neurons of the cerebellar cortex, the cells that compute the error correction algorithm for every balance adjustment. Each Purkinje cell integrates input from up to 200,000 parallel fibers and produces the inhibitory output that calibrates the corrective motor response. As the cells thin, the computation becomes less precise. The correction that was perfectly calibrated at 40 firing the gluteus medius at exactly the force required to catch a lateral perturbation of a given magnitude, overshoots or undershoots at 70. The body overcorrects and stumbles in the opposite direction, or undercorrects and continues falling in the original direction. Vestibular hair cell population declines, the semicircular canal sensors that detect rotational perturbation and the otolith organs that detect linear acceleration lose cells progressively with age. The vestibular signal that alerts the balance system to the perturbation arrives as a weaker, noisier input. The detection of the perturbation itself becomes less reliable. The system may not recognize the lateral displacement until the body has already moved further than the correction can recover. Proprioceptive receptive density in the ankle and hip decreases. The mechanoreceptors that report joint position and loading to the cerebellum thin with age. The data the cerebellum computes from becomes less precise. a proprioceptive system that reported ankle angle with 1-degree accuracy at 40, reports with 3-degree accuracy at 70. The balance system computes corrections from degraded input. Peripheral nerve conduction velocity slows. The signals from the proprioceptors travel more slowly to the spinal cord and cerebellum. Central processing time increases as synaptic transmission slows. The 200 milliseconds that was met with 50 milliseconds to spare at 40 is met with 10 milliseconds remaining at 65, or not met at all, and the correction that would have prevented the fall arrives 5 milliseconds after the body has passed the recovery point. Each factor alone narrows the window. Together they compound, and the person who falls laterally at 68 did not fall because any single factor failed. They fell because 5 factors converged on one stride to push the total response time past the window in one direction at one moment. The 3-direction tap protocol trains the 2 factors most responsive to intervention: corrective force magnitude through repeated practice at near maximum demand, and cerebellar computation speed through the 3 data set switching that forces rapid motor strategy changes with each cycle. The remaining 3 factors, vestibular hair cell loss, proprioceptive receptor thinning, and peripheral conduction velocity slowing, are partially addressable through the head turn progression and barefoot practice, but represent the limits of what a 90-second protocol can reach. Well, the arithmetic of the compound is worth understanding because it explains why the fall curve steepens non-linearly. If each of the 5 factors reduces balance performance by 10% independently, the compound reduction is not 50%, it is not additive. Each factor multiplies the effect of the others. A 10% reduction in gluteus medius force means the correction is weaker. A 10% reduction in cerebellar precision means the weaker correction is also less accurate. A 10% reduction in proprioceptive acuity means the less accurate correction is computed from degraded data. A 10% reduction in vestibular sensitivity means the degraded data arrives later. A 10% reduction in conduction velocity means the late, degraded, less accurate, weaker correction arrives more slowly. The multiplicative effect produces a compound performance reduction that exceeds any individual factor, and this is why fall rates increase non-linearly after 65 rather than linearly from 50 onward. Protocol cannot reverse all 5 factors, but the 2 it addresses, force magnitude and computational speed, are the 2 that produce the largest individual contributions to the compound. A stronger gluteus medius catches lateral perturbations that a weaker one cannot, regardless of how degraded the vestibular input was. A faster cerebellar switching speed selects the correct motor strategy sooner, regardless of how slow the peripheral conduction is. The 2 trainable factors partially compensate for the 3 that training cannot reach: buying milliseconds in a window measured in milliseconds, buying newtons of force in a correction measured in newtons. That convergence, muscles weakening, computation thinning, sensors degrading, conduction slowing, all narrowing the 200 millisecond window that separates a caught stumble from a fall, is why the 3-tap cycle became the first 90 seconds of every morning, 90 seconds per day, 3 directions. The perturbation rehearsal the system needs before the real perturbation arrives unannounced on a surface the body has not prepared for. The wet tile in the bathroom, the dog that crosses the walking path, the grandchild who runs into your legs from the side, the loose gravel under the heel on a garden path. Each of these scenarios arrives in a specific plane. Each requires a specific corrective response. Each demands that the cerebellar database contain an entry for that direction, not as exercise, as perturbation rehearsal for a system that will be tested without warning on a surface the body has not prepared for. Anyone with a recent hip or knee replacement, active vertigo, or a diagnosed balance disorder should perform the tap protocol with both hands on a sturdy chair until their physician confirms readiness for reduced support. The deliberate perturbation may exceed the reactive capacity of a system still recovering from surgery or vestibular disruption. Stand behind a sturdy chair, fingertips resting on the chair back, not gripping, not leaning, just touching for emergency support that the balance system knows is available. The knowledge of the support changes the neural drive. The motor cortex allows greater perturbation magnitude when it knows a recovery option exists. Shift weight onto the right leg. Lift the left foot 1 inch off the ground. Forward tap. Reach the left foot 12 inches forward. Touch the toe lightly to the ground, lightly enough that the stance leg bears the full body weight throughout, the touch serving only as a spatial target. Return to center. Lateral tap. Reach 12 inches to the left. Touch and return. Backward tap. Reach 12 inches behind, touch lightly and return. 1 cycle. 3 taps covering 3 planes in approximately 6 seconds. 5 cycles on the right leg, then switch 5 cycles on the left, approximately 45 seconds per side, 90 seconds total. Pace slow and controlled, each tap approximately 2 seconds out and 2 seconds back. Speed defeats the purpose. Fast tapping uses momentum rather than muscular control, and momentum bypasses the cerebellar computation that the protocol is designed to train. The learning occurs during the slow, controlled phase where the balance system must compute continuously, adjusting the corrective response in real time as the center of mass shifts incrementally with each centimeter of leg reach. Daily, morning optimal. The vestibular system recalibrates after overnight rest, and the proprioceptives to calibration input in the first waking hours. The first session of the day produces the largest cerebellar prediction errors because the system has not computed balance corrections during the overnight period. Larger errors mean faster learning. The Purkinje cells adjust their synaptic weights more aggressively when the prediction error is large. Progression follows the support reduction principle. Week 1, fingertips on the chair. Week 2, 1 finger on the chair. Week 3, hand hovering above the chair surface without contact. Week 4, no chair. Each reduction in external support forces the balance system to generate greater internal corrective force. Stance leg muscle activation increases approximately 15% with each level of reduced hand support because the motor cortex can no longer rely on the hand to catch an overcorrection. After 4 weeks of the basic protocol, add a head turn during the lateral tap. Turn to look over the opposite shoulder while tapping to the side. This creates a vestibular visual conflict. The semicircular canals report the head rotation while the visual system reports the room spinning in the opposite direction. The cerebellum must resolve the conflict while simultaneously computing the balance correction for the lateral perturbation. This is the exact scenario that produces falls in daily life, turning to look at something while walking. The vestibular and visual inputs conflicting during a lateral weight shift that the gluteus medius must catch. The single leg stand tested one direction, forward and backward, the ankle strategy. The one plane your body rehearses with every step of every walk. The stumble that arrives at 65 does not come from that direction. It comes from the side, and the gluteus medius must catch it in 200 milliseconds. It comes from behind, and the anterior chain must fire before the body passes the backward recovery point. It comes with a twist, and the deep rotators must stabilize before the torso spirals past the vertical. 3 directions, 3 stabilization systems, 3 cerebellar computations, 45 seconds per leg. The balance you have trained is real. The other 2 directions are where you will fall, unless the cerebellum has rehearsed the correction before the perturbation arrives. Forward, sideways, and back.